I'm worried the best game of all time may never come out, but maybe you can change that. See, when I first played Hades, I wasn't sure how much I would enjoy it. It was a roguelike, and I'm not a big fan of the genre. But it was made by Supergiant, and at the time, they hadn't made a single bad game, so I figured I'd give it a shot. After spending well over 100 hours in Hades, my opinion on roguelikes didn't really change, and to be honest, I'm still not a huge fan of them. But despite that, Hades is one of my favorite games of all time. So how did that happen? It's all because it does something special, and it's not just Hades that does this. All of the best indie games do this, and it happens to be the key to some of the greatest games ever made. However, the fate of these exceptional games may be in jeopardy, and it's a problem that could spread to AAA games as well. In fact, it already has. But let's go back a bit. A couple years ago, I played CrossCode, and throughout the entire game, especially after finishing it, I had one enormous question on my mind. I mean, just look at the combat. For a quick rundown, you've got command over 4 different elements. If you've played Neo, it's kinda similar to the stance change system there. Each element gives you new combos, attacks, and even stats. This creates a brilliant system where each of the 4 elements lends themselves perfectly to a specific playstyle. Look at fire, for example. Fire raises your damage. It gives you more melee-focused head-on attacks, and even your guard becomes an offensive tool in this form. Fire is all about pure offense and damage. Compare this to its longtime rival, Ice, and you'll quickly start to see why this system is so great. Ice is all about defense. You get a pillbox that protects you from attacks and massive walls of ice that you can toss up to keep enemies at bay. But this is where CrossCode's combat really takes a massive step ahead. You can switch between these 4 elements while you fight, and that switch is effectively instant. This allows you to switch between elements mid-combo. You can start with something like lightning and then finish off a combo with fire. Or if you're on the back foot, you can switch to ice to regain your balance. This is why I say CrossCode's combat is unlike anything I've ever seen before. This ability to totally change your fighting style depending on the situation is just so satisfying. And yet, this is just one piece of the puzzle that makes CrossCode such a one-of-a-kind game. While the combat is the best part of the game, the puzzles, enemies, characters, story, and even level design are all on par with some of the best in the industry. Which is why the question that loomed over my head the entire playthrough was, how on earth is this game so unknown? Here are 3 graphs displaying the views on YouTube trailers, peak views on Twitch, and number of Metacritic user reviews for Celeste and Hollow Knight. Now, here's CrossCode on those graphs. Look, I'm not saying CrossCode is better than Hollow Knight and Celeste, I think there's an argument to be made, but this is absurd. And yet, in spite of how unknown this game is, it's still one of the best I've ever played because of its unique ability to blend together different genres unlike anything I've ever seen before. It's like a Zelda game with top-down combat like Devil May Cry and a story and characters like a Xenoblade game. And it somehow juggles all of these aspects perfectly to create an experience unlike any other. This is the first part of what makes indie games so special. They're home to some of the most unique ideas in gaming, and just why they're able to execute these ideas is something I'll go over a bit later. But first, we need a little bit more context. What if tomorrow Nintendo decided they were done making Zelda games? Well, they effectively did this already with 2D Metroid games. Before Dread, Metroid Fusion was the last original 3D Metroid game, and it came out in 2002. This means in 2017 it had been about 15 years with no new 2D Metroid games from Nintendo, and you can tell just by glancing at the indie scene that they were ready to take matters into their own hands. This is the second biggest strength of indie games. When AAA developers decide to abandon a series, indie devs can pick up the spirit of that series and revive it in a new way. You can see this in the rise of Metroidvanias like Axiom Verge, The Messenger, and of course, Hollow Knight. The one aspect that all of these games have in common is that they were inspired either directly or indirectly by that one Metroid game from over 15 years ago. Nintendo, for one reason or another, chose to stop making games like this. But because of these passionate developers who wanted to see their favorite games come back, the series didn't die. It was able to live on in a different form. You can see this same trend in games like Link to the Past. People love this style of Zelda game, but the last time we got something like this was 2013 with Link Between Worlds. So what did indie devs do? They made games like Blossom Tales, Hyper Light Drifter, and most recently Tunic. Indie devs can take these games that were abandoned and tossed to the wayside and revive them in a new style. They don't do this because of money, but because they just really care about those games. And that's what leads us to the secret that these games have. The question here that really brings all of this together is, why do people make video games? The answer to that question is going to vary depending on who you ask, right? Some companies will aim to generate the max amount of revenue possible. They'll make their games with the express purpose of making money. But I think we can all agree that the best games of all time are often focused more on creating something special as opposed to something profitable. This is where indie games come in. Let's look at Hollow Knight as an example of this. Team Cherry was inspired by older platformers like Metroid, Zelda 2, and Mega Man X. Jeez, no wonder this game was so good. The inspiration and will to create something special is the reason we have what so many consider to be one of the best, if not the best Metroidvania of all time. Not because it would make a lot of money, but because it sounded like a cool idea. Hades did this same thing. Supergiant was concerned first and foremost with making the best game possible. No microtransactions, no DLC, just a full package of the best content they could deliver. Now, I'm not saying AAA games are never made with any sort of soul or passion, but I am saying that more often than not, these great indie games weren't made to turn a profit. In fact, a lot of them started out as free passion projects that other people saw the potential in. This also relates to the execution of these unique ideas that I mentioned earlier. When you don't have a multi-billion-dollar company breathing down your neck, you can really show off your true creative vision. But this raises the question from the beginning of the video, what do you have to do with this? And how could we miss out on some of the best games of all time? Let's go back to the spring of 2006, to one of the biggest missed opportunities in modern gaming. Okami isn't some technological marvel that stands out due to the amount of polygons it has. Instead, it goes for a more living painting sort of look. This one-of-a-kind art style is then complemented by some of the most stunning music I've ever heard in a game. And of course, it wouldn't be a great game if the gameplay itself wasn't fantastic as well. It's a Zelda-like game with dungeons, items, puzzles, and bosses. It even sits at a towering 93 on Metacritic. But despite how exceptional this game is, it never got a sequel. Not because of quality, but because of its sales. See, Okami couldn't even break 300,000 on its initial release, and as a result, a sequel was never seriously considered. And that just kinda sucks, you know? I mean, a game this overflowing with personality and character, it's clear the developers who made this seriously cared about it, and yet it just didn't do well enough commercially to receive a proper sequel. And that's where this story would have ended, but Capcom decided to re-release the game in HD for modern consoles, and it was able to reach just a bit more than that original 200,000. The HD remake sold 2 million copies. Thanks to the HD remake, this game got a second chance. But just stop for a moment to think about just how many games will never get that second chance. Think about how many once-in-a-lifetime games will never get to exist because of poor initial sales or bad advertisements or unfortunate release windows. And that's where you come in. If there's an indie game you like, one that you think really needs more support, let people know about it. Tell your friends, post about it on Twitter if, God forbid, you use that app. Do your best to get the word out. And if you're on the other side, if someone is giving a game the highest praise they possibly can in hopes that you'll play it, maybe give it a shot. Because while I don't know what that studio could make next, I think they deserve a chance. And on another note, I think I found out what masterpiece actually means. And it might not be what you think.